Thank you for staying with us. Now, Botswana's president, Mokwetsi Masisi, on Friday urged the 19th session of the Council of Ministers of the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, ARIPO for short, in Gaborone, to introspect on barriers hindering the growth of the continent's creativity to global standards. He said, and I quote, "Africa's creativity should impact communities and the world. The assessment of our shortcomings and corrective measures should begin with national intellectual property officers. After this, we will then step up to the ARIPO level to strategize and unblock bottlenecks." End of quote. Now, according to him, Africans have been trading and practicing intellectual property for a very long time without the knowledge of its theories, principles, and terminology. This year's ARIPO Council meeting of ministers was held under the theme Intellectual Property for Economic Growth. To look at this and ways to enhance Africa's creativity, I'm joined by the Executive Director, House of Arts, Harare, Zimbabwe, Casper Chigama. Thank you very much, Casper, for giving us your time. Good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm sure there are some people like me before today. I never heard about ARIPO. Talk to us about why the body exists and what good it does.
I think a few months before today, I was like everyone else, because I also didn't know about ARIPO until I got invited to one of the sessions that they did in here in Zimbabwe. And to my understanding now, and also as a stakeholder, I now understand that ARIPO is there to promote the development and harmonization of intellectual property systems in African countries like Zimbabwe and other member states. I also know that their main aim is also to facilitate the protection of intellectual property and the rights of intellectual property, innovation, creativity, and also they are also working, like you said before, the session that happened, they're also trying to aim for making sure that creativity and intellectual property also gives growth to the development of Africa.
Okay,
So
Casper, I must say,
I now understand, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I must say, I feel less weird having you say you also didn't know about ARIPO. At least now we have that cleared. Let's look at what they stand for. How does intellectual property contribute to economic growth in African countries?
So for me, intellectual property can contribute in so many different ways. Because when you own something, it also encourages you to be innovative enough and also think outside the box and not be, have that fear of what if someone steals my stuff. So it encourages innovation, creativity by also giving you the legal protection and even incentives for innovators, artists, entrepreneurs. It also enables the commercialization of intellectual assets, even for musicians, because I'm also an artist. So when I went to the program, I was going there as an artist, also trying to understand what happens with my product if I am to produce something. So it also attracts even foreign investment and technology transfer by providing a secure environment for intellectual property rights. Because, sometimes when you make something, when you do something, sometimes there's now a lot of technology, there's internet. So people post things, so someone might also steal your stuff and, make them theirs. So if your property is secured, if you go through that and make sure that you have secured your property and you have secured your legal rights to the product, it then makes you, it also secures even your incentives or even the allowances. So to me, it promotes even trade and economic integration by facilitating the licensing and transfer of intellectual property between the countries. Even it builds. So basically, it just builds even the knowledge-based economy for fostering research and development in activities. So it is actually something that I think really, really does promote economic development or economic growth in Africa.
For every good thing, there's always, some challenge or hiccups along the way. So I'd like you to speak to us on some of the challenges that African countries face in harnessing the full economic potential of intellectual property.
Well, for instance, the biggest example is, like you said, you didn't know about it. So it means it's actually a barrier because there's limited awareness and understanding of intellectual property rights amongst creatives, amongst even business people, amongst innovators, even just the general public, including me. I also didn't have much information until this year. So that's one of the biggest challenges that I've seen, and also maybe the framework. Sometimes I feel like they're a little bit inadequate and weak. So in terms of enforcement, sometimes it's limited to an extent that you always hear some cases where maybe this artist in Africa his stuff has been stolen by this artist, or this creative person is also crying for over maybe some rights for his products and stuff. So the enforcement for me it's still a little. There's also, I mean, I can't say it's weak, but yeah, there's still much work to be done in terms of the enforcement mechanisms for the intellectual property protection. Then also the biggest challenge that I also have seen or that I've noted is also even the resources. There's lack of resources and capacity to effectively manage and enforce the intellectual property rights because, like I said, the awareness is limited. So only a few people and a few privileged creatives know much about it, the intellectual properties. So those few that knows the intellectual property may end up stealing products from those that don't know, and they legally protect those products as theirs. So to me, that's a very big gap that is there. So there is need for maybe an enhanced awareness on intellectual property rights, so that everyone gets to understand and everyone gets to know. And maybe also something that I can add is maybe there's also limited access to finance and support services for innovation and intellectual property commercialization. Also talking about cultural and traditional practices that may also conflict with certain aspects of intellectual property rights. I mean, in Africa, we have certain cultures that we have and certain traditional beliefs that we have. So sometimes there are some that I also think that they do not worry much about protecting or following that path because of traditional reasons or because of religious reasons. So that's also another challenge that will also maybe hinder some people from actually practicing that. I think in short, that's what I think are the challenges. Yeah.
All right. Aside ARIPO, the thought just came to me. Aside ARIPO, are there other bodies that, try to promote the potentials of better knowledge of intellectual property? If yes, will it be their responsibility, or it is the responsibility of all creatives to be part of promoting knowledge of intellectual property?
I think it's everyone's responsibility. The product holder or even other organizations like us as House of Arts, we also try to promote and also disseminate information on the advantages of having your property or of having intellectual properties, because here in Africa there is lack of knowledge. That's what I think mostly. So for us to say it's one person's responsibility or one organization's responsibility, it will be a lie. So I think that maybe it's just everyone's responsibility, and we are trying our best also to try and make sure that we we get the information to everyone, especially the creatives who we think that some of them even lack information just about what maybe Aripo is or what intellectual property is.
All right. To your knowledge, are there some maybe strategies that are already being adopted by African countries to promote the use of intellectual property for economic growth? Maybe some you can share with us?
Sorry, you said they what?
I'm just asking if there are any initiatives or strategies that African countries are all that you're aware that African countries are already using to promote intellectual property for economic growth.
Yeah, I've seen African countries doing quite a lot. I heard about South Africa developing a strong pharmaceutical industry for leveraging intellectual property. Here in Zimbabwe, I know that the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe is also they created a strategy for music. It's a music strategy for national music strategy that also includes how artists can actually protect their products. Right now, they're also working on a film strategy, and I know much about Zimbabwe because I'm Zimbabwean.
Yeah,
and I'm
we're
in
happy to
Zimbabwe.
know what's happening there as well. I mean, if you don't know what's happening in your own zone, we wouldn't expect you to be able to talk about Africa. All right, let's look at how intellectual property rights can be balanced with the need for innovation and knowledge sharing, particularly in the context of developing countries like we have in Africa.
Yeah, I think if we start by maybe implementing flexible intellectual property regimes that allow for exemptions and limitations to rights, particularly in areas such as maybe education, even creatives, and also maybe encouraging the use of open innovation models that promote collaborations and sharing of knowledge and resources. Also doing maybe exchange, cultural exchange, even what do you call these ones? Yeah, I think it's just cultural exchange where maybe people from the different countries also get to interact with people from another country just to understand maybe from each other's perspective. Maybe also promoting or developing even mechanisms that ensure fair and reasonable licensing terms for intellectual property, especially now that I talk more for creatives because that's where my field is. I also have seen that maybe in terms of how the licensing, the mechanisms are there, even sometimes there's the prices for you to register your staff. Sometimes it's a little bit higher than maybe the income that you get out of the product. And sometimes there's looking at our industry right now, the creative industry, especially for countries like Zimbabwe, most of the African countries, there is no much that income that comes from our product unless maybe you have you are an established creative or you are now an established business person. So it's also what comes with, the mechanisms that are there for you to actually register. The requirements are sometimes exorbitant that you may it also hinders others to try to practice it because they would think maybe the coming up with registering your staff against the income that you get out of the staff. So you end up thinking that maybe it's just better if I try to do it on my own, and then you also risk losing your product to someone else who is already established and who's also able to do that. So I think there's also a need for maybe engaging in international discussions and negotiations to shape maybe global intellectual property norms and policies that consider the interest of developing countries from at a global level, where we see that maybe someone from the US and someone coming from Zimbabwe, there's a difference, there's a big gap that is
All right, before we lose you, I want to drop this question.
Like I said, we are still growing. And
all right,
yep.
Quickly, are there any emerging trends or technological advancements that are shaping the intellectual property landscape in Africa?
Are they what?
I'm asking, are there any technological advancements that is shaping the landscape of intellectual property in Africa?
Yes, I think so. I've seen there's a provision for legal protection for intellectual property rights. That also encourages foreign investors to bring their technologies, brands, and expertise to African countries. So, also maybe in Zimbabwe, I'm seeing a lot of people creating stuff online. Even the authorities, the bodies that are there to protect intellectual properties, they're actually providing. I've seen some social media campaigns where they're trying to disseminate information to the creative so that they can understand better what is there, and also they are trying to also engage on artists, in creatives, even the young people with innovation ideas to come up with ideas that will maybe bring, or that will also try to give the balance like you asked before. So I think for me, there isn't much yet that has been done, but I can see potential in the moves that are being taken by the bodies, the moves that are being taken by ARIPO in engaging innovate to also contribute. So for me, I can't say I've seen much, but I can simply say I've seen great potential.
Okay, if you were to make suggestions now, you've already made some, but if you can add to that, how can African governments, what steps rather can they take to support and empower local creators and investors as well as entrepreneurs in leveraging intellectual property for economic growth?
I think maybe if, like I said before, if we can maybe strengthen our our exchange, cultural exchanges, even promoting more on how we can learn from each other, creating those platforms where we have more discussions on what exactly can be done, how maybe innovators from Egypt, innovators from Uganda, Kenya can also maybe contribute and give what they are doing. I'm also thinking that maybe intellectual property rights can also enhance the competitiveness of African innovators or creativeness or businesses by protecting their innovations and enabling them to access maybe even global markets. So it also goes back to us making, what do you call it, an intentional move to break that barrier, that global barrier that is there, to make sure that we are also not only focusing on Africa, but we are also learning from even people from all around the world, and also getting to create those platforms where we get to learn and also get to share ideas and take some.
All right, Casper, I guess that's a good place to leave it for today. Thank you very much for speaking with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
And to you, our viewer, thank you for your time. Remember, you can access our conversations on one slot anytime by going to News Central YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.